doo doo doo. Boo doo 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 da. Boo doo 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 doo.
I don't know why I even had these things right. Bother to go through the trouble of recording it because that's probably what it's going to be from now on. It's just not acapelling.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Watch No Evil. This is Matt.
And this is Zach.
And today we're going to be talking about the 2002 science fiction horror film by acclaimed director M. Night Shyamalan. So this is, I think, got a lot of interesting elements to it, and it definitely changed sort of the cultural representations of aliens in film. I think one of the important scenes from this movie where it's in South America and you get to see the alien like nonchalantly walk by the alley of the house has rippled throughout the fabric of American cinematography for the last 10 years. But what did you think about how they treated the aliens in this film from a cinematography standpoint? Because that was really the first time that we got to see what the alien looked like, and in my opinion, it felt like M. Night Shyamalan was trying to set up this almost Jaws-like idea where we didn't see the alien, and for a lot of the film, we see reflections or we see the impact that it left, for example, when they are watching it on the roof and they get to see the alien, much like the characters in Jaws get to see the shark, but we don't. We have to wait for that moment. And then for me, that moment kind of broke the immersion. So I'd really like to hear your take on that scene and how impactful.
Well, yeah, so like you're talking about the climax of the film when they beating the alien with the baseball bat and then basically killing the alien with the water towards the end.
Yeah.
Even in that scene, which is like that's the climax, and you're supposed to kind of, I guess, fear the alien in that moment. Most of the shots of the alien are through the reflection in the television. I don't know if M. Night Shyamalan was still trying to create this otherness around the alien by doing that. At this point, we've seen like full frontal shots of the alien, so I don't know why it just felt kind of weird at that point. It's like now is the time usually in the movie where you show the entity in its full presence.
Yeah, it's supposed to be that like sudden visceral energy that we now come face to face with the thing that we have been told to fear the entire movie. And I think that the reason that Jaws was so amazing and it was so impactful, I mean, think about how people still receive like sharks and shark imagery and being at the beach. I mean, everybody knows that feeling, and the idea that we didn't get to see the shark until the end of the movie, it continually enhances that like mystery and that terror of the unknown that is obscured by the water. And in this case, we get that same feeling. Like the whole movie builds on this idea that we don't get to see the alien just out in the open. I actually think that the greatest disservice that M. Night Shyamalan did to this movie was have that scene at the children's party in South America and show the alien in person. Because if they had done that entire climax scene in the reflection of the television or in the reflection of the water glasses, I think it would have been so much more impactful.
I like the comparison to Jaws because a lot of the suspense in both of those movies rides on the fact that you don't get to see it until the end. A lot of suspense is like, well, what does it actually look like? How freaky is this thing? And how scared of it am I supposed to be? And that's where a lot of the fear comes from. It's like, well, this thing must be pretty bad. And I do think that the Brazil tape it's a real letdown because you see the alien kind of like lope from behind this car. It's like, oh, that's what we're afraid of.
Right. He's just taking a stroll, and And I think that the thing about it too is they did not make a dynamic character design. The alien that they actually have doesn't have that same like visual impact. And I'm thinking of movies like District 9, where you have the alien creature, you see them the whole time, and they're so visually interesting to look at, and that's really important. And even in other movies like E.T., the alien is interesting to, and then we get this movie and it shows the alien and we really get to see it at the end, and it's like, oh, it's just like a big smooth-skinned like baby monster that
Okay.
has no facial features.
I do have to fight you on this because I actually kind of like the alien design for the reasons of believability. Something that always bothers me in alien movies is when there's some kind of alien that looks so inhuman and so otherworldly that it's like, how is that thing surviving in Earth's atmosphere? Is if you have some kind of being that is so unlike a human, it's not very realistic for it to survive in Earth's atmosphere. So when you get an alien design that's like this, it's very humanoid looking, and that's kind of like the original form of the alien. You know, you think like the Green Man.
Yeah, it's very prototypical.
Right. It's like, okay, the person who made the original like green alien kind of style thing didn't have much imagination. And then you see things like, District 9. You see a lot of imaginative different alien shapes and races, but the likelihood of something like that surviving in Earth's atmosphere without any kind of aid is very unrealistic. So for that reason, I think that it's a pretty good design.
But it's a movie. Yeah, but the thing that I don't like is that throughout the movie, we're supposed to expect this creature to inspire such fear in Mel Gibson and in Joaquin Phoenix when they see it on the roof. Like, they are terrified. And even when M. Night Shyamalan is, like, coming out of the house after he trapped one in his closet, like, it is awe-inspiring, and it is supposed to be terrifying, and then we finally get to see it revealed, and it's just like, this is the creature that they rejected using from Bird Box.
Well, I don't think it's so much they're looking at the alien and go, whoa, like, this thing's really scary to look at. I think where the fear comes from when they look at the alien is what the alien represents, and that's somewhat important in this film because that's where a lot of the fear comes from. It is this, why are they here? What are they doing here? How dangerous are they? And that's kind of prevalent when Morgan is talking, he's reading that book about it, and then Graham's asking him all these things about what it says in the book, because the book seems to be right a lot of the time.
Yeah, and I get what you mean. I do understand that it is supposed to be representative, but don't you also think it's supposed to represent the great unknown and the great mystery of the universe? One of the themes of the movie is not understanding how things go together, or how things happen, why things happen. And then we get to see this creature, and I think that the way that they sort of set up the mystery and set up the fear aspect, it is a sort of letdown in imagination in a way that I wish that they just hadn't shown the creature at all, because if you had seen it in just the reflection of the TV screen, it still had that like humanoid form, but it was still sort of obscured. That for me was the best representation of and if I had left a theater after seeing that version, just in the back of my mind, the only way that I saw the creature was through the reflection of a TV screen, I would have been much more impacted by that element. I think that the thing that I'm disagreeing with is really just showing it on camera.
Yeah, I think we can agree on that. I wish that they had shown less of it, just because, like I mentioned earlier, like, it's the whole fear behind it is what it represents. It doesn't matter what the alien looks like. It only matters what it represents. But apparently their skin changes colors too, so that's kind of...
It does.
Neat.
They do have a chameleon effect to them, which I thought was really interesting and totally underutilized.
Well, so remember when they first see it on the roof and they just have the camera shot of almost as if like you're the alien looking down at them.
Which is a brilliant shot.
Yeah, it's great cinematography there. But I think so when they're talking to the cops, I think that the reason that they can't remember what it looks like is because their skin changes colors. So they're like, well, what did it look like? Was it tall? And yeah, it was definitely tall, I think. Like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much the only point in which they really even reference that they had this chameleon ability. All right, I'm completely working on theory here. I'm not sure if that's what was intended.
Right.
It seems like it could be.
That's all of what we do is theory.
That's true. That is true. I mean, I'll sum it up by saying I like the alien design better than if they just used female Scandinavian Olympians like they joke about.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the water. So they decide, it seems like in the whole moment with like the toxin coming in, they also decide that these aliens have to have a weakness, and that weakness happens to be water. And they do kind of reference it throughout the films. They say they don't seem to like water too much. They stay away from bodies of water and all that. And they do say that they came for the people, not the planet. So you can kind of glean from that they don't really plan on staying on Earth, a planet which consists 2/3 of this toxic material to them.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, what do they do when it rains on Earth? Like, what is their plan for that?
Yeah, I was thinking that too. It's just like, did they have no prior planning when they came to this planet that it literally rains liquid fire from the sky for them? Because there is no way that they're getting, I mean, unless their umbrellas are like fantastic. You know, they could get around it, but unless they have incredible weather forecasting technology, in which case we ran them off much.
They have, assumingly, higher technology than what we have on Earth. So why don't they have like raincoats or umbrellas?
Yeah, and I mean, Zach, wouldn't you sacrifice a couple hundred, maybe a couple thousand people on Earth just to have better weather predictions?
No. I think we're pretty good on that.
That was absolutely a loaded question.
I realized that. Yeah, well, let's get back to the water. We'll circle back.
Yeah.
So water, obviously very important in this because the aliens it's toxic to the aliens, and that's what they end up defeating the one alien with. And it's one of the quote unquote signs throughout the movie, because Bo,
yes,
the daughter, is shown as saying, you know, she's got glasses of water all over the house, and she's saying that it tastes funny or it's contaminated or something, and she kind of has this obsession of leaving glasses around the house. I was like, it's kind of like garlic and vampires. It's like she's like placing the water around the house to like keep the aliens away.
Yeah.
And you'd think that the alien would have like seen all the water around the house and been like, oh, be around this stuff.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see water, I think, in films like this too, because whenever we see water in a movie, it always has some sort of representation or meaning to it. And in this movie, it is like way over the top, clear what the meaning is. And actually, when I watched the end scene, that climactic scene where the alien falls into the cabinet and the glass of water knocks over and starts to spill and burn the alien, my mind immediately had like That's So Raven flashback moment to The Wizard of Oz as like the beginning of the era where water is naturally meant to represent like purity or the flow of energy, the flow of time. And like, we always see water with this like crystalline association, you know, it's very clear, it is very understanding. And then to the villains in movies, it's always their downfall. So The Wizard of Oz, where Dorothy kills the witch by throwing water on her, or in Friday the 13th, where you have Jason Voorhees, who is afraid of water because he drowned in the lake. And it seems like a really natural sort of device that they use. Water is pure, and that purity kills monsters.
Yeah, I think more like cleansing.
That
Uh,
too.
yeah, it kind of goes along with the whole purity thing, but we think of water as cleansing. We wash our hands with it, and it's kind of this idea that it can like water's got this kind of like power to it.
And to tie it to vampires, holy water is the main weapon of blessing others, or stopping vampires in their track. And it's also used in The Exorcist. He throws his holy water on the demon and says, "The power of Christ repels you." So it's so common, I think, see water be that tool. And all I wanted to say was, I think that the way that they do it in this movie is actually a really refreshing take. Refreshing was not a pun.
But it's funny that you mentioned holy water, because I had actually thought of that like in combination with the kind of overarching religious themes in this movie. I thought, what if they meant to combine those, and it's meant to be holy water? And when Meryl is swinging away, and he's using the bats kind of spraying the water all over, it's kind of like the power of Christ compels you.
And the idea that it burns, I think, is really sort of the thing that pushes that over the edge, because when you throw holy water on a vampire, they burn. When you throw water on the witch, she burns, she melts. When you throw holy water on the demon-possessed child, it is a physical affliction that she feels in the form of burning, because that is paralleled, because it shows when the water falls on him and you start to see that scar, it starts to steam as well. So it is giving you the indication that the water is that science fiction-y weakness too. It's supposed to be representative of how everything in the movie is a sign, and it all interconnects in the end, and we get to see everything play out. And his wife dies by getting in the car accident from Ray, and the reason that they know that the aliens are there and that they're coming after them is because in his moments of desperation, Ray calls Mel Gibson to come to his house, and then Mel Gibson cuts off the fingers of that one alien, and then they start to torment him, and then the water is what stops them. And Morgan has asthma, and so the alien poison doesn't get in. I think that the thing that made me so mad about this movie was the way that they tried to be like, it was all a sign, and it was all a sign from God. Like the last 3 minutes of this movie were so groan-inducing for me. I was like, no, you can't wrap it up like that. Like, you had a strong idea and a strong premise, and it's like the way that they tried to tie everything together so rapidly at the end was just disappointing. And I think that the thing that made me so mad was because, like, Mel Gibson's last couple of lines are, he has asthma, so his lungs were closed, so the poison didn't get in his lungs. And then he's thanking God because he knows that it was a sign from God, that he gave Morgan asthma so that when the aliens came, 10 years after his birth, that he would have asthma and he would have an asthma attack, and then the asthma attack would save him. And it's just like, well, damn, Mel, what about all the other people that died on the goddamn planet? Like, geez. I think that with movies like this, the thing that bugs me about it is that this method of treating things like a sign from God is so narcissistic. Because it's like, oh, God cared so much about me and my family that he catered this entire cultural relevance around these issues so that it would directly impact my family. So that when my wife died, I would lose faith in him. When Meryl, he wasn't good enough to become a major league player, so he never left the hometown, but he was good enough to win that record so that the bat would hang in their house for the rest of their life, that Bo would have this obsession with water, and that Rory would have asthma, that it would all tie together. And it's like, you neglect the idea that the life of anyone else on the planet matters.
It's very much like Tim Tebow thanking God for every touchdown.
Yeah,
that he makes.
exactly. I think that that's
It's like, you
so
think he cares about
narcissistic.
that? No. Yeah, we should talk about loss of faith as a theme, though, because it's a large part of the movie, and that's why it's called signs. Like you mentioned, it's like supposed to be signs, not necessarily from God, but signs that uh, Graham is supposed to go back to his faith. And
Right.
M. Night Shyamalan has actually made statements about like this movie is not like the reason that this is considered a horror movie is because there is some fear involved, and the fear is not necessarily fear of the aliens, as we discussed, that scary, other than being this unknown force. The fear really lies in the overall stress of the situation, and then also the fear of losing your faith, where it's very literal, like it is in this sense of losing your faith in your religion, or losing your faith in the case of Merrill, kind of loses faith in himself and his ability to a baseball player, or whatever else you might be able to lose faith in.
Yeah, I mean, it is the sort of central theme of the movie is that loss of faith and then finding your way back to it. And I gotta say, I think the idea that is such a Deus Ex Machina approach to it, it's the God and the machine. It's like that idea that everything has to happen for a reason, and even loss of faith happens for a reason, or it's like a test that you've been put through by God. For me, this movie was so strong that it didn't need that button up at the end. It in fact would have benefited from not having that sort of button.
Right, it's just like they just spell it out so many times. Like in the climax of the movie, when the whole swing away Meryl part, it's like Graham has this flashback, and they re-show parts of the movie that you've already seen. It's like this montage of every sign that kind of leads up to this moment of, here's the baseball bat, and here's the water, and here's his wife dying and saying, swing away, Meryl, and here's the asthma, and all this stuff. And then it like kind of goes back and he goes, swing away, Meryl. And it's like so heavy handed.
It really is like the audience is dumb and they have to be told how smart I am, how smart it was of me to set up all of these signs. The reason he lost his faith in the first time was his wife died and he had to see that. And then him saying, don't you do this again with Rory. And then when they are having that moment outside, all he would have had to say was the lungs were closed because of the asthma, so the poison didn't get in. And it would have been like, oh, that's a great idea. And that sort of is all of these other things that are happening. I think that it would have tied so much better together, and you wouldn't have had to have just that like dumb montage moment. And then it could have been the reverse. He could have thanked God at that moment instead of it being like, oh, everything was fit together. Your whole thing had a plan. You had this whole grand scheme for me. It could have been like a loss of faith, salvation, like the test to salvation idea. And I just think that it was disappointing.
And in The Sixth Sense, they do have in that moment where he's like, where Bruce Willis realizes that he is a ghost, they have this kind of flashback montage like they do in Signs. The only difference is that it just works in that one because of how they slowly reveal it, and just because of the nature of the signs in this movie, it doesn't really work here because this like the signs there are tons of signs throughout the movie. In fact, they on the radio and on the TV they say the word signs in reference to the crop signs so many times that's like, okay, we get it. And it just makes the whole flashback thing unnecessary.
In that as well, I go back to the same idea. One of the things that I hate in movies is unnecessary esoteric dialogue and like explanation, or when movies try to seem much more heady and intelligent than they need to, especially because M. Night Shyamalan describes this as his popcorn movie, or his most popcorn movie. Like, this is the movie that you show to the mainstream audience because it's something that they'll get. And it's like, dude, none of your other movies are they're not that intelligent. Like, chill just a little bit. Chill just a little bit. And I think that the thing that, like, drives me insane about it is specifically that scene between Mel Gibson and Joaquin Phoenix when they're on the couch, and he's just like, you can be a miracle person, or you can be a person that just believes that things happen and that we all get lucky. And it goes on. And then it switches to Joaquin Phoenix, and he's just like, oh, there was this girl at a party, and I was going to lean in to kiss her, but then I realized I had gum in my mouth. So I turned away to take out my gum, and then she threw up, and that was a miracle. If I didn't have that gum in my mouth, she would have barfed on me. And that's how I know that God is real. And it's like, this is dumb. You wrote for Stuart Little. So I don't know. That it just felt like it was trying to be so intellectual and witty, and it didn't need to be that. And in fact, it detracted from the movie.
I think that moment was supposed to be almost like Meryl's character doesn't really get the concept that Graham is trying to explain to him, because it's like what he's talking about is something in a much grander sense, and Meryl applies it to like this really insignificant situation.
Right. I mean, we're supposed to believe that Meryl's not the smartest person, just in general.
Meryl's strength stats are through the roof, but his intelligence stats are quite low.
Yeah, he rolled a D2 and he still got a critical fail.
I think the first like 3/4 of the movie does a really great job creating this atmosphere of suspense around the aliens and just overall stress about the situation. And I think that the climax of that first great part of the movie is the dinner scene when they all have their meals, and then Mel Gibson's character starts kind of like freaking out.
Yeah.
Even though he's trying to make this like kind of a happy, positive thing where they're like, all right, like it's kind of like the end of the world, but we're all strong together kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's heartbreaking.
And then he like breaks down, and then they're all having their moment. And I think that's like a really, really good portrayal of what a situation like that can produce.
Yeah, I think that moment is so incredibly powerful to just see them all just falling apart at the end. And it's after, they boarded up the house and they're worried for their safety. It's very touching, and it's a really important moment for the film, and it's a really important moment for the character of Mel Gibson, so Graham Hess. And I think that after that scene, the movie collapses so quickly because they try to force a lot of action and a lot of exposition into the remaining parts of the movie, which is why, I will reiterate, if they just cut out a couple of those scenes, or if they had just moved them earlier, it would have felt less rushed of an ending. It's like, oh, we've got this last 10 minutes. We need to get A, B, C, and D all done. How are we going to do that? And then they just sort of throw in the flashbacks. And I think had they moved some things around and sort of let the ending have a little bit more of that gravity and that weight, especially because we've come off this really emotional high into action heavy high, that they could have more successfully given him the cathartic experience of reestablishing his faith. That might be really what my problem with it is, that it tries to satisfy the audience in showing them what they've done, but it doesn't give that cathartic element and that like cathartic restoration to Graham. They try to satiate the audience, not finish out the character.
Yeah, and like you said, it all happened so fast at the end. It's interesting how M. Night Shyamalan planned it that way, because I think it was Mel Gibson that said the storyboards for this movie were so ridiculously detailed. Like, he knew exactly what was going to happen and like how each scene was going to play out because how detailed the storyboard work was. You'd think that he would have thought like, hey, maybe the pacing would be a little bit strange given the message of the film.
Yeah. So, you know what, we should move on to something that's not going to be a point of contention for us. Abigail Breslin and Rory Culkin, they killed it in this. They were so good.
Abigail Breslin, the moment that I was convinced was when they come out of the basement, and then she's like watching the TV, and she's like, "Oh, they're doing this dance on the TV," and she's doing this hilarious dance, and she's got like the goofiest look on her face. So I was like, "Oh my god, she's so good at acting." And
Yeah.
this was actually her film debut.
Yeah. She does a good job of actually like portraying that childhood innocence and ignorance, and also is capable of delivering those really heavy moments like when she's crying at the supper table earlier on. And it's so funny to watch her go from that scene to her being like, they're dancing on the TV like this. And it's like, oh man, that's how a kid would act. That's how a kid would react to that. And it didn't feel like she was delivering lines. It felt like she was actually saying that as
Yeah,
a
it felt
child who's
like
watching
she was
this.
actually reacting.
Yeah, exactly. Versus, some of the other kids in movies where it's like they're doing this on the TV. Dance, 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 dance. Like, I don't want them to be like one of the children from Barney.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because I recently watched The Children of the Corn, and in that movie, like there are takes that they decided to put into the movie where kids look almost directly at the camera, and you know they're reading off of cue cards.
Yeah.
They're like they'll pause in the middle of a line, they'll look over towards the camera, and they'll say the rest of the line. And that was long before Signs, but
Mhm.
it's still like these were kids that were older than Abigail Breslin was when I did this movie.
Yeah, and I mean, she was excellent in this movie, and I think that Rory Culkin also was really excellent in this movie, and he of course had the added difficulty of having to follow up his brother's acting for Home Alone, so like he held his own too. And I think that it's really interesting that you get sort of the like fun, naive, sort of weird child that is Abigail Breslin that's like, yeah, this is how kids are. They're just weird like that. Sometimes they just don't want to drink the water because they think something's wrong with the water. And then Rory Culkin is just like this very stoic, sort of like strange. He's the kid that's gonna tell you about every dinosaur in the dinosaur book. You know what I mean?
He's the dinosaur kid.
Yeah, he's the dinosaur kid. Exactly.
Except a little bit more like put together.
Right. I think that's why I love their dichotomy so much in this is that they are very clearly children that can act and be like children in front of a camera.
I feel like a lot of child actors, it's almost like when the child is acting, it's like they're trying to act like an adult, but saying lines that kids would say. So there's like this weird kind of opaqueness
Mhm.
to what you're seeing, and it's like that. I think that's what makes it unbelievable.
Yeah.
And then when you see kids act like kids through the lens of being a kid, it's like, yeah, like, that's just natural.
You know that Rory Culkin has a long history of horror films, right?
I did not know that. Actually.
Yeah, he was in The Zodiac. He was in Scream 4 as one of the people that was murdering everyone in Scream 4. So he's got like a nice little horror rap sheet going on, but they did really well, and I think that having Joaquin Phoenix, who went on to play obviously the Joker, and having Mel Gibson there, like it was a really stellar cast. And one of the things that I appreciated about Signs, they kept the cast relatively small, and they were able to do that effectively. Partially because I think that a lot of horror movies, they get obsessed with that like idea of having a body count. They need to show death. They need to show despair or danger. And in this, it really was about torment rather than trying to be a prototypical horror film. So it was nice to see 4 very competent actors on screen.
Right, and I think that Rory Culkin interacted with Joaquin Phoenix and Mel Gibson really well. I'm not sure that Mel Gibson and Joaquin Phoenix, like, I don't know if their character interactions were, like, quite as convincing. And I know that neither of them were actually M. Night Shyamalan's first pick for casting.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Which we will talk about in trivia.
Oh, a perfect segue.
Okay, if you're ready for trivia.
I'm ready for trivia. Let's do the trivia.
All right. Well, first, we gotta have the stupid movie pun name. So, this is M. Night Shyamalan. It's a stretch, I know.
Wow.
Speaking of speaking of casting, do you know who was originally cast to play Meryl? And this was someone who was cast, like there was a contract all ready to go here. So we've got choices: A. Macaulay Culkin, B. Joseph Gordon-Levitt, C. Mark Ruffalo, or D. Johnny Depp.
Mark Ruffalo.
You're right. Did you know that already?
I didn't, but I know that Mark Ruffalo was gaining popularity at that particular time. But that's when he just had a brain tumor issue.
Yeah. So that's actually why he had to pull out. He found out he had a brain tumor. It was benign, so, and we know that Mark Ruffalo is fine now.
Oh man, but then he became the Hulk. Do you think he's doing okay still?
That's some other medical issue.
Well, it's the radiation,
And there's another interesting fact here that Johnny Depp was actually asked to play Meryl, but he turned it down. So he was never cast, but he was asked to star in the movie.
That is an interesting one.
Yeah. And so there was no one cast to play Graham aside from Mel Gibson, but there were other people who were offered the role before him. So here, another multiple choice. We've got Clint Eastwood, Bruce Willis, Sean Penn, or Tim Curry.
Clint Eastwood. Because of the religious stuff.
Well, so for the role of Graham, M. Night Shyamalan wanted someone who the audience would believe would protect his family at all costs. I couldn't say Tim Curry with a straight face, but I don't know if Mel Gibson actually gave that impression of protecting his family at all costs. It's like, yes, you believe that he wants to protect his family, but it doesn't seem so like ride or die.
I'm kind of fine with that, actually, because I don't think that I would have wanted to see Gran Torino Clint Eastwood protecting his family. I think that it wouldn't have been believable. I think he would have gone out like guns a-blazing, like killing aliens.
We would have ended up with something more like Independence Day.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Another fun fact is that, when they're like, oh, the aliens are about to come in, they're boarding stuff up, and then Graham starts telling the kids like the stories of their births.
Oh yeah, those are M. Night Shyamalan's kids' birth stories, aren't they?
They are.
I remember that one.
I find to be very unimaginative now knowing that, but it is interesting.
Well, it's always the story. I think that was another like biblical thing to it, because in every telling of the nativity story, it's like, oh, when Jesus was born, he didn't cry. That was the whole thing. And that's what it tried to do with Bo. It was like, oh, when you were born, you didn't cry, you didn't make a sound. You were just perfect and happy. I think that it is important that it's in there and why he used it in the first place.
Right. No, I think it's fine that they did that. And
it's an odd use of those stories. Sort of self-serving, I think, for M. Night Shyamalan to use his own kids' birth stories as like a way to talk about himself.
I should say a lot of the source that I use for these trivia questions is just like the IMDb trivia section on a movie. It's very clear, given that section of the IMDb page, that M. Night Shyamalan shares a lot of details about how he produces a movie. And that's both a good thing, but also, given the nature of his films, I think kind of ruins it a little bit. It kind of goes along with what we talked about with the signs in this movie and everything being explained so in depth. And it's like, I don't want you to explain all the things in the movie to me. I just want to interpret it for myself.
Right.
And that's why I have a horror movie podcast.
Yeah.
Don't you know this, M. Night Shyamalan?
Let me tell the audience.
Right. Let me tell them how to interpret this film. Let's do one more question.
Cool.
What Alfred Hitchcock film served as a major inspiration for Signs?
Ooh, that's a good one because I'm not totally sure. All right, let me run.
Yeah,
let me
no.
Don't help me. Let me run down my Hitchcock knowledge.
But it's really not going to help you that much. I'm just going to tell you that M. Night Shyamalan had the cast watch this movie a few times throughout production.
I'm going to say it probably wasn't Psycho. I'm going to say that I don't think that it would be Rear Window. I'm going to go with Vertigo.
It's actually The Birds.
Oh my god, I forgot about the birds.
Right, and if you've seen The Birds, you can probably guess why. It's
Yeah.
the whole stress behind the two situations parallels nicely, I think.
Oh
It
man.
is it is interesting how you bring up Psycho though, because actually M. Night Shyamalan requested of James Newton Howard the
Composer Bernard Herrmann influences.
yeah, he just asked him to make some references to classic horror films, and there is a Psycho reference in the main title theme.
And it starts off with that, I even mentioned it when we were watching it, that like dance macabre tritone interval. And then it's the where they're like running between.
Yeah, that's the part.
Yeah, those scales are so reflective, and the thing about those that make them much more clear that they are Bernard Herrmann-esque is because of the orchestration. It's very classical, and it's very much centered on the use of timbre, with the contrast between the strings and the oboe and the clarinet and the winds. And you don't hear a lot of good oboe in horror movies, first of all, but also later on in the film there is sort of a stylistic shift away from that Bernard Herrmann sound, and it's really noticeable when he starts to move into like the quintessential augmented major chord and mediant tone relationships that we've become really acquainted with in science fiction fantasies in film music. So I think that definitely for the main title sequence it's really clear, but it starts to like die away as the film goes on.
Well, what you're talking about, like later on in the movie, where it starts to sound more like a science fiction movie soundtrack, is he also references Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yep, that was the other thing I was
Yep.
gonna say.
Yeah, so that's what he's heading for there.
Perfect.
Later on in the movie.
If there's one thing I know about, it is film music.
Yeah, just one final fact. James Newton Howard, he actually wrote the score in an unusual way. He actually started writing the score before filming had even started on this movie. He was using M. Night Shyamalan's storyboards, and he felt pretty confident from these detailed storyboards that he could start writing, and then M. Night Shyamalan also kind of gave him this scope of, hey, could you try to reference these classic horror films as well? So he must have thought he had enough, at least to get started, before they even filmed.
You know, that makes sense too with how you talked about the storyboards being so specific that Mel Gibson was able to fully realize his character early on. It would make sense that James Newton Howard would be able to use those same storyboard materials to start creating a score that then he could tailor to fit the actual production of the movie. And I bet it took a lot of weight off of his shoulders because, you know, in typical Hollywood fashion, the style of writing scores is you get the film and then you go on a cocaine bender for the next week until it's finished because you have such a high turnaround. But if James Newton Howard was starting early, it gave him a lot more time to really lovingly craft a film score. And I would say that this movie has a really well-crafted film score. I think that it is, in fact, one of the best scores that we've talked about so far.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's incredibly well balanced, kind of going between what you would think of as an actual film score, and I say that with a little bit of hesitation just because most horror movies don't have a score that actually feels like a film score.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we all know what I mean by that.
Drones and shock tones.
Yes. It doesn't feel like when you're watching like a classic film or like an actual fully fledged big box office film where you hear this very Hollywood soundtrack kind of thing going on. And I think this balances that with what we have grown to know as the horror, like science fiction soundtrack. There's a good mix between the two.
Well, and it's clear that this guy knows how to orchestrate My biggest issue with like modern film composers, just all of them, they don't know how to orchestrate. They're sitting at their Cubase on their computer and they just downloaded a new orchestral brass pack and they are just popping in chord. And this is a score where you can tell he thought about using an oboe at this particular moment because the timbre of the oboe is going to pierce through the string section. He is using the brass to punctuate and to articulate and to interrupt rather than being like the bass subject material. Like, this is a real score. This is a real orchestra. And you don't get that anymore. You get like well, our strings are going to hold this really low tone and let's throw some tubas on there too. And I just got this new live strings pack that I can download and import in and make cool sounds in my program. Like, it's clear that they're not writing scores anymore. They're programming scores.
Right. And that actually ties in really well with what I was about to say, is that you get the impression that James Newton Howard is a musician and he composes like a musician rather than a programmer, where he just, I got this toy, I'm going to use it whether or not it makes sense. Mm-hmm. He refrains from doing that. He puts a lot of thought and effort into what he's doing.
Yeah, and
not that other soundtrack composers don't put effort into what they do.
Yeah, and I don't want to disparage programmers. Obviously, by programmers, we mean the people who are sitting at Cubase or sitting at Fruit Loops, and they are plugging in pre-made sounds that they have. There's a program being advertised to me on Facebook, and it's just like, make cool and interesting drum beats. If you click this button, it randomly generates drum beats for action-packed movie sequences, and it demonstrates it. And I was just like, this is not crafted. This is not artisanal. This is, I go to Hy-Vee and I buy the Hy-Vee white bread. I want a score. I want to go over to the Hy-Vee bakery and get me some like goddamn focaccia bread. I don't want none of this Betty Crocker white bread bullshit nonsense.
Well, yeah, doing that kind of scoring, if you want to call it that, it doesn't take any musical instinct.
Mm-hmm. But there's a homogeneity in contemporary film score that is such a product of this ready-to-make packaging of film scoring programs that you can just upload into Pro Tools or Cubase and have at your fingertips. And it's led to sort of this desophistication and lack of craftsmanship that you used to get with people like Max Steiner or Bernard Herrmann. I would say that the score to Cat in the Hat was more inventive and filled with ingenuity than most of the contemporary film scores that we hear. Make something original.
It's just, I'm surprised it took us 6 episodes for our conversation to devolve into rants about soundtracks.
For me to get legitimately angry about a film soundtrack. And the only reason I'm legitimately angry because this film soundtrack was so much better than so many soundtracks that I can't not talk about how terrible the other ones are.
Well, especially for a horror movie.
Especially for a horror movie.
The standout fact here.
Yeah, which is why, like, when we touch on them, there are the ones that stand out. But if you're going to try and convince me that the soundtrack to Ouija number 5 is at all good or original or new or designer or artisanal, I'm going to fight you on a pile of bones in hell.
Did you say Ouija number 5?
Yeah.
Is it like Mambo number 5?
Exactly, yeah. I mean, that's a better movie soundtrack.
Lou Bega stars in Ouija number 5.
A little bit of Annabelle in my life. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this week's episode of Watch No Evil Signs Edition. This is Matt.
And this is Zach.
And we'll catch you next week.